Hello, everyone. Welcome as we wait for folks to join the Zoom webinar. Thank you all for being here. My name is Marci Calabretta Cancio-Bello, and I am one of the co-founders of the Adoptee Literary Festival alongside Alice Stevens. We are so grateful to you for being here and so grateful to all of our presenting authors today for taking the time and energy to share this space with us today. I am joining in from Miami, Florida, which is the traditional land of the Seminole, Miccosukee, and Tequesta people. I do want to acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land, as well as the stewards who have cared for it throughout the generations. If you are interested in learning more about the territory that you are based in, I'm going to drop a link in the chat and you can check out your own location. A couple housekeeping things. We do have live transcript captioning available. If you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen and click live transcript, you can click either show subtitle or view full transcript. There's two different options there. We will be having an audience Q&A at the end after everyone has had a chance to read and converse a little bit. So throughout the event, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box, which is also at the bottom of your Zoom screen. This day would not be possible without all of our volunteers. We've had some really amazing folks on our team, building the website, running the tech, gathering resources and helping promote. But we do want to give a special shout out to Loyalty Bookstores, our official local independent booksellers, and an adoptee owned bookstore. So please purchase the author's books through them directly if you can, or if not, your local independent bookstore. Thank you also to Pan America, Miami, South Florida chapter for sponsoring and making our literal Zoom webinar possible. We'd also like to give a shout out to our partners, Adoptees On, Adoptee Voices, Adoption Knowledge Affiliates, also known as the Starlings Collective and the Washington Independent Review of Books. You have joined the poetry panel, and I am so honored to introduce our authors very briefly. Their full bios will be on their website at adopteelitfest.com if you want to read a little bit more about them and check out their work. We'll be hearing first from Mary-Kim Arnold, a writer and artist. She's the author of Litany for the Long Moment, an experimental memoir of adoption, as well as The Fish and the Dove, a collection of poems. She teaches in the nonfiction writing program at Brown University and lives in Rhode Island with her family. We'll also be hearing from L.M. Brimmer, a writer born in southern Wisconsin and now living on Dakota lands in Minneapolis, Minnesota. In 2019, they edited an anthology called Queer Voices, Poetry, Prose, and Pride. They have published essays and poetry in the Alliance of Adoption Studies and Culture Journal, the Public Art Review, among many other places. And they are currently a poet in residence with Writing the Land and attend Randolph College's MFA program. We're also honored to have Lee Herrick, the author of 3 books of poems, Scar and Flower, finalist for the 2020 Northern California Book Award, Gardening Secrets of the Dead, and This Many Miles from Desire. He co-edited The World I Leave You, Asian American Poets on Faith and Spirit with fellow adoptee Lee Silvius. Born in Daejeon, Korea and adopted to the United States at 10 months old, he served as Fresno's Poet Laureate from 2015 to 2017. And of course, we also have Beau Schwabacher, a South Korean adoptee who was adopted at 3 months old. She grew up in Illinois, and her poems have appeared in Cha, Cutbank, Diode, among many other places. Her new book, published by Tinderbox Editions, is called Omma, Sea of Joy and Other Astrological Signs. We'll be hearing a little bit of their work. So without further ado, please welcome Mary-Kim Arnold, our first reader.
Hi, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here with all of you. I thought I would read 3 poems. 2 of them are in my collection, The Fish and the Dove, but they're all written as sort of self-portrait poems. And the first one opens the book. Self-portrait as Semiramis. Had I been raised by doves, wouldn't I have learned to fly? By wolves to hunt in packs? Had I been raised by gods, wouldn't I too be godlike? In the movies, the orphan is the killer, not loved enough, unwanted, but wasn't I most wanted? My mother, fish goddess, dove into the sea for the sin of loving a mortal man. I love a mortal man too. At night, I coax him from sleep, rousing him with my mouth. By day, we build high brick walls around us, our Babylon. Had my mother lived to see me rise from this boundless deep, would she recognize me as I have grown large and my arms have become the long arms of the sea, reaching over and over for the shore? And this next poem is called Self-Portrait as Praying Mantis. Let my body emerge from these dry brown husks with black dots for eyes and voracious, mouth like flypaper, summer's dry heat, shedding skin. Does not rain for days, does not give way. The Korean goddess of rainfall is asleep in the north. The only woman who can tell me about my mother is 6,000 miles away and dying, sends me letters on blue paper, so thin it is translucent, hangul small and tight, yielding nothing. Nymphs are born by the hundreds. At birth, they resemble adults. Who do I resemble? From time to time, I remember Saint Anthony, patron saint of lost things. The nuns teach us to invoke him. Saint Anthony, please look around. Something is lost and cannot be found. Ask the woman for a name, for one word or two that will describe my mother, but my letters come back unanswered, years and years unanswered, years of looking for a name to drape across this cradle of time, name to stitch into this swaddling blanket, name to burn into this skin that must resemble her skin. From time to time, I remember sparrows bathing in dust, wild turkeys strutting through the dry brown yard, inside the house, bowl of persimmons on low table, and a woman, hair falling down her back, looking away, never turning to see, never turning back, never looking for me. Saint Anthony, patron saint of lost causes, please look around. In the garden, they lay in wait, then strike, death grip on their unsuspecting prey, so fast. Oh, mother, my method is ambush too. I will wait for so long, will spend the days waiting, but then when you are close enough, I will come at you fast and I will take you apart. And this last self-portrait poem is not explicitly about adoption. It's called Self-Portrait in Love. We walk the tombs of the dead and write our names on the walls as if dragging a pocket knife across rough stone is a way of staying alive. Do you know how much it takes to die? The doctor asked. I didn't know what to say, but you start counting on your fingers. 1, everything we have ever held is on fire. 2, look, my hands are on fire. 3, look, the fields are on fire. 4, in the night, a fat lizard hides. He is burning too. In the azure morning, you go down and you come up struggling to keep count. Here is something I know. This will be the end of us, and we will go down in a blaze, and we will go deeper down, our names in each other's mouths. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mary-Kim. It's wonderful to be in a reading again. I don't know, for many of us, it's been a while. And I love the way that poems kind of curry us into these new worlds. Hello. I am Ellen Brimmer, and I'm here to read a few poems. They come from a manuscript in progress that I'm very much in progress on, and so I thank you for your ear today. This poem is called A Poem for the Duck. Oh, my therapist wants to talk about anything other than work. So I describe the photo. It's silvering, the fingered edges feathered. In the city, a porous pond with a floating duck. O insists it's just projection, a protective coat, and marks my missives generic or worse, tedious. When I say that everyone who tries to read me misses the point, this is what I mean. My mother was alive. I pressed the couch cushion into another dampened isthmus, one fewer bird, denting the shell with both thumbs. The cracked window is a recurrent cuticle, its delicate net screen. But looking out, I wonder why stop to admire a stoic sky. I want to forget her, my mother's palm, the counting. O chides the camera back into the dark room of my pocket, and I hear her cry, fly out. Before I continue, can you see me? Or is the camera still on Mary-Kim? Okay, I'm just making sure. Thank you, everyone. Poem for a reunion, poem for reunion pancakes at IHOP. My spark plug lungs are hungry like a one-way, where the air strikes at another inherited caution. Fire in the heart. Kin is that kind of paradigmatic capture, where language is a small thicket behind my tongue. Sometimes the line breaks smooth into simple blue booths of memory where the excess is stored. But when I look at the debris, it seems to fall inexact. Refills show languishing chances to ignore adaptation, and even light conversation is risk that skips around, elevating a new sister's plea to imagine us both as mothers. Together, we are mere genetic patterns, and language becomes a small thicket behind my eyes. If we label the Booth sisters, does that make this an inherent bond? The whole highway, a pulse line whipping back and forth, pulse like a chainsaw or a medical device. Can she hear me beating? Out the window, my eyes follow the purple air dancer. Big. My sighted blood is quick to and identifies as an automatic blower, a hand that carves with keys, crooked letters in the imitation grain, and language is a small thicket behind my heart, between my shoulders where it deepens into twins, splitting from the oak trunk to meet again in the wind. My branches become particle board too. My body has been pressed, purchased, and shipped. And my last poem is a poem for the happy birthday message on LinkedIn, because reunion is complicated, y'all. There are no rules to this. And sometimes I feel like the fact that we live in such a digital world and have so many different platforms to connect on can make things a little hazardous. So poem for the happy birthday message on LinkedIn. Blank has wished you a HBD, and the whole world glows. When I spy the figment, all alarms go off. Panic tugs my false rib, pulling my best bent. Oh, is this roulette? Or the checkered love of the cab's weaning bulb? Split the indecision. Answer only if you can nurture a new name like a palmed object. This is not some colleague defunct, but a defunct father on a handheld screen. Blocky fingers hover over the hueless glass face of it. This is the strange arrangement of estrangement. Loose lead and always pleading another to put down the propellant. Reunion like an explosion of tough spat rings. The orange shock of open curtains at the wrong hour, wrong day. Thank you.
That was wonderful, LM. Thank you. Really happy to be reading with you and Mary-Kim and Bo. And I wanted to just say before I read a few poems, a special thanks to Marcie and Alice for your hard work and your vision. I feel like this festival is historic, so thank you for bringing us together. I'm just going to read 3 poems from my latest book, Scar and Flower. First poem is, I think, speaking to or about my first or birth mother who I haven't met, and maybe to adoptees in general. How music stays in the body. Your body is a song called First or Birth Mother, a miracle that gave birth to another exquisite song. One song raises 3 boys with a white husband. One song fought an American war overseas. One song leapt from 14 stories high and like a dead bird shattered into the clouds. Most forgot the lyrics to their own bodies or decided to paint abstracts of mountains or moons in the shape of your face. I've been told mothers don't forget the body. I can't remember your face, the shape or story, or how you held me the day I was born, so I wrote 1,000 poems to survive. I want to sing with you in an open field, a simple room, or a quiet bar. I want to hear your opinions about angels. Truth is, angels drink too. Soju spilled on the halo, white wings sticky with gin, as if any mother could forget the music that left her. You should hear how loudly I sing now. I've become a ballad of wild dreams and coping mechanisms. I can breathe now through any fire. I imagine I got this from him or you, my earthly inheritance, your arms, your sigh, your heavy song. I know all the lyrics. I know all the blood. I know why angels howl into the moonlight. Okay. I'd like to read this at the risk of getting too heavy, but this is an adoptee festival, so it's called Elegy for Philip Clay, who was adopted to the United States and then deported back to South Korea and committed suicide in 2017 at age 42. And if a person wanted to turn off their sound, I would understand. Elegy. In my dream, when you fell through the sky from 14 stories high, all burning paper, your body broke into 100 flowers and floated into the clouds. The moon and stars still. Your fire now ash, your spirit free, wild, and true in a deep calm where country is a black night, a blank question of insufficient starlight, where no child, man or woman, no idea as beautiful as you is ever deported, is ever only the harsh light of your deepest wound. I wish I could have eaten your fire and howled with you. Eclipse, fracture, angelic cloud song. May the wild and broken stars remember you. May you be at peace in a quiet part of the sky. And lastly, my attempt at an anti-suicide poem. Stay. I'm not what you thought an ocean would look like, but once a fire starts in you, there will always be ash. There are long walks, thank goodness. There are woods to be small in. There are anchors to the world, so you will not fly away before it is time. The miracle of grass, even though you may forget it. The fact that you are loved, even though you may forget it. And what a miracle that is, being loved, or more so, that you are a wide blue ocean capable of loving. You churning body of sea life who survived the oil spills, the broken glass, the dead birds floating in the bay. Thank you.
LM and Mary-Kim, your readings were so beautiful and moving. And I also would like to thank Marcie and Alice for bringing us together. This event is bringing me so much happiness just to have this space and connection with each other. And thank you to everyone who's joined in today. It really means a lot, I think, to all of us. And we're so happy to be here with you. I'm going to be reading from Omma, Sea of Joy, and Other Astrological Signs. Luck of the Rabbit and Blood Type AB. My family consisted of a dragon, a tiger, and a rat. I was a rabbit from Korea with AB positive blood, which means when I found a baby rabbit near the childhood fence, I thought my mother would save it. The dragon and the tiger were constantly fighting while the rat self-destructed in very clever ways. I was soft as a bun in a hot metal tin, wheeled to the next table for the next hungry family. How to love an adopted Korean girl. Take pictures of her in the dark when the moon is almost full on the verge of an eclipse. Ask her if she sees the rabbit. Show her there are two ways of looking at almost everything. She will find her way home by eating pumpkin porridge. She will realize her roots by remembering she came to America on tiny boat shoes. Her mother is beautiful, you know, because she was born from the same heartbeat, an intelligence reserved for the soft-spoken. Bring tangerines and light citrus spritz on fire to get a better look at her eyes. She will smell like forgetfulness and dank oil. The neck is a cradle. She will love you if you stay, if you promise you have never left. I wrote this next poem while I was searching for my birth mother, and I was really hoping that I would have the chance to meet her. Part of my experience as a Korean adoptee is that I'm really distanced from my roots, and I have this longing to connect with my Korean heritage and also the language. But my Korean is pretty terrible, so forgive me for any mispronunciations. This poem is called Mugunghwa, and it's the national flower in South Korea. One moment, I'm having a technical difficulty with finding this one. Well, I think I actually might switch this up a little bit. I'm going to read An Adopted Korean Girl Imagines Her Birth Mother at a Seoul Fish Market. I was studying the language and I found this expression that a classic beauty in Korea is a pearl rolling along a jade dish. An adopted Korean girl imagines her birth mother at a Seoul Fish Market. A pearl rolling along a jade dish, I took it from classic beauty in Korea. I heard you can't see the stars in Seoul. Can you see the stars in Seoul? This body digests everything. Your voice is somewhere in the fish market where rare creatures are pickled and salted and stolen. And the last poem I'll read has been part of my journey where I decided to volunteer at an orphanage near my birth village and During that time, I was going to search for my birth mother, but before I left, I learned that my birth mother was dead, and she died in 1992, which was 5 years after she had given birth to me. So this poem is from my Omma, my birth mother. An adopted Korean girl's New Year's wish for her birth mother. What else does an orphan girl have? Whomever I'm with, I please. Brave Omma, we're outcasts, and Ajuma is selling cigarettes next to the place we were last together. A ghost is blessing my cakes. I'm steaming my misshapen sampyeon over pine needles. This earthy, real grief was our beginning. As an animal, I need to be held. Beauty is a feeling. Thank you.
Wow. I'm just taking all this in. I think the audience would also probably appreciate a moment to just let all of your words sink in. Thank you so much for sharing your poems in this space with us and each other. I'm going to kick off our conversation. I'd like to start with a question for you, Mary-Kim. I have your two really incredible books here, and I think this is across the board for all of your work, but Mary-Kim, for your work, especially Litany for the Long Moment, there's an interrogation of structure in your work and language itself, white space. You yourself have called this book an experimental memoir that includes photographs, a language of documentation and questionnaires and other things like that. Can you talk a little bit about how you see hybridity and experimentation as a way to inform your specific work?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Marcie. I took some notes so I would have my wits about me. But I think my relationship to any sort of formal experimentation, genre blurring, hybridity are very much related to the way I understand myself as an adoptee. I was raised by white parents in a white working class neighborhood in the suburbs of New York in the 1970s when, there were not any other adoptees that I knew. And in those contexts, I was always very visible and conspicuous, and my physical presence within my family and within my school sort of called attention to itself and made me subject to question, right? Like, where are you from, or what are you? Questions to my mother, like, is she yours? And even though those questions all sort of related to visible difference, they also had this sort of bristling of unrecognizability, unknowability, or illegibility. And so I think that meant that I had to become adept at finding language to explain myself, to explain the conditions for whatever discomfort or disconnect that my presence created in those contexts. And, as so many of us know, the story that we perhaps told, we had to tell even if we didn't know that it was true. So all of which is to say, I think that, very early on, I had this understanding that there's a distinction between how things were represented or expressed and how they felt. And so that tension has been present for me from the beginning. And although as a child, I think that was, I experienced it more as confusing or disorienting. But as an artist, as a writer, I think I began to recognize that that little gap, that little tension could also be a space of possibility. So the idea of starting to intentionally modulate that space between knowability, recognizability, and interior experience, to think about how I might use that gap to subvert expectations, to subvert, sort of assumptions of form. And it felt like something that I could play with. I don't think I'm very invested in traditional forms or traditional genre distinctions. I'm really interested in work that creates a little bit of friction between between expectations and experience. And I think that's probably because I see myself as moving through the worlds that I've been in as a certain kind of friction. And that feels like it can be a generative space.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that makes so much sense and resonates with me. And I see everyone else kind of nodding their head a little bit. Yeah, I love what you said about that kind of interiority and creating your own language for what you needed to express. And that actually brings me to my next question, LM. For you, you have this really gorgeous essay called "In Search of Other Mothers' Gardens" on creative kinship, and I highly recommend anyone who has access to it. We're going to try to get some access for you folks in a moment to be able to read this essay too. But you talk about sort of going from interior to the exterior. You talk about the fractured familial and cultural ties that transracial adoptees especially have to experience. And you talk about then the sort of flip side of that, exploring the possibility that developing creative kinships can repair. And I want to note that you use repair rather than heal, which I thought was a really powerful distinction. Can you talk a little bit about this in your own work, whether as a poet for your own work, or editing and community work, anything, and how you kind of see all of that tying together?
Yeah, I think it, interestingly, I think it comes back to this question that I asked when I was reading, because the various technical things, I couldn't tell if you could see me. And there's something about when we grow up, you can't really tell if you're being seen or not, really apprehended, right? By like people around you, your classmates, et cetera, in a way that's like, but do you see me? Like maybe even when I look in a mirror, do I see me? And so I think that's a question that kind of constantly agitated me in and out of the writing process. And I think about the ways that it shows up for me now in terms of looking at creative kinships as a place of repair. If I have to acknowledge first. That acknowledgement is a first step of, you open the space with the land acknowledgement, or maybe I open my day with the land acknowledgement and thinking the keepers of the land that I'm on and the cedar trees that are, cleansing the air and, purifying the space. Like maybe there's a way in which I honor my day-to-day and daily ritual practice with, acknowledging where I've been. I think that's a type of creative kinship that can kind of support me as an adoptee and anchor me. And for me personally, give me a sense of stability and sobriety. That's pretty important. And what I think that means in terms of writing is that I have to find ways to kind of struggle with that challenge that we kind of struggle against so much erasure in our lived experience that it makes it hard for us to show up on the page in a way that knows and that is confident in claiming both the I, and especially in a poem, the I, the speaker, the I, right? Those things can be really difficult to manage, or I've personally experienced them to be. And when I think about the kinds of relationships that I've developed, not with just what I've read, but of course the folks that I've also met, are writers living in Minneapolis. I'm lucky to be close with Shannon Gibney, who's a dear colleague and friend of mine. And that relationship that we have, that I consider, her to be very much a sibling of mine, both in the work that we're trying to put forward and out in the world, but then also, I feel that sense of kinship, and maybe that's that kinship that I don't necessarily feel with my adopted family. There's that sort of accidental family that I think is in the room. But overall, I think there's this idea that we're writing into a tradition. We're not alone, right? That sense of community and solidarity is very present.
Yeah, thank you for that. It is incredibly important. And I do want to tell audiences, this is the anthology that you edited. It is a really stunning way of you even putting other people in conversation with each other, even as you are in conversation and community with them. So thank you for that. Lee, I'd like to shift to you. I know I've been following your work for some time. You have 3 books out. And what I feel like I've noticed in rereading these books and prepping for this conversation, there's been, from your first book, like such deep exploration of your own personal experiences as an adoptee, which of course is carried across your all of your books. But there's also been what I would maybe call a blossoming into other broad topics that are really universal, really tackling timely things, like even your Philip Clay poem, right, talking about suicide, talking about gun violence in Scar and Flower, among many other things. Can you talk a little bit about how your identity as a poet speaks to the work that you do with social justice? I know you're very community oriented as well.
Sure. Yeah, so my first book, I started writing it probably 10 or 12 years before it was published. And in 1997, one of my professors gave me this call for submissions, and it was for a book I could not believe was being published, honestly. It was the first anthology of Korean American adoptee writing called Seeds from a Silent Tree. And I just was surprised there were others out there writing. And so it was very personal, like you mentioned. My first book was very exploratory. It was very, I had not gone back to Korea at the time. I hadn't really even started thinking about birth family search, much less my own culture or adoption. But yeah, so, but I think I was always interested in politics. My graduate thesis was on presidential rhetoric. I was involved in some different political organizations after college. And, I think as an adoptee, our bodies are both personal, but also political. Our language is personal, but also very political. And so when I was writing my latest book, Scar and Flower, this was around 2014 to 2016, 17, where, in 1 year, 2014, Eric Garner was killed by the police. Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson by the police. Tamir Rice was killed in Ohio by the police. In Florida, 49 people were killed at the Pulse LGBT Club nightclub. I was deeply bothered by these things, deeply, deeply shaken. And so the poetry, as it always can be, I think, was an open field for those things. And so I feel like I like the word blossoming, and I also think of it as like a wholeness where we have space to write the personal, the political, whatever we might feel when the poems are calling to us.
Yeah, thank you for that. I've taken you as a model in many respects of how to even begin to process some of the things that we've seen in recent years and to write about them. So thank you. Bo, I'd like to shift to you. I know that you are, of course, a poet, and this is Omma, the Sea of Joy and Other Astrological Signs. But you also wrote a really wonderful essay for Cha Journal, and you were talking about how discovering other South Korean poets' voices was like forming something recognizable like a constellation. And you mentioned Suji Kwak Kim, and Su Huang, as well as some adoptee poets, Han Young Shin and Jennifer Kwan Dobbs. And now your book has officially joined the constellation in the world. Can you talk a little bit about how you put together your book and shaped it a little bit, and what you hope for the next generation as you have been shepherded in by the previous generation?
Thanks for that great question. I also wrote that essay right after my book launch, and Lee Herrick and also Su Huang and Sun Young Shin made that launch so special for me. It was during the pandemic, and their poetry is illuminating. It gives off so much light, as does their presence. And so I was feeling the glow of the warmth that they shared with me, and that partially inspired some of that essay. if I can address the second question first, I hope that younger adoptees, especially if you're in the audience, that you feel that sense of connection. And there's so many external factors that we deal with as adoptees that are outside of our control, like if we have a reunion or how a birth family member will respond to us, if we'll ever find a DNA match, how politics influence our experience as adoptees. So my hope for you is that you connect within to a love that is so powerful that exists within you, that your life will flourish beyond the trauma of a hard beginning. And so writing my book took at least 10 years. It was an ongoing process. I had to go through a lot of my own investigations as an adoptee. I searched for my birth mother and went to my birth village and spent some time in an orphanage in South Korea. And then I also explored some issues with my adoptive family. And I felt like each poem started with something that I needed to understand, like a question or a sound or an intense emotion. And through the writing process, I felt like the poems actually changed me. The process of writing the poems changed me. So that was my experience.
Thank you. That's really beautiful words that I wish I had heard as an emerging adoptee writer. And I do hope there are folks in the audience for whom that resonates. And yeah, I think writing has changed all of us, right? And that's why we're here with books. So thank you all for your generosity and your wisdom and your writing. And I'm so excited for more work to be out in the world from you all. Before I open it up to the audience, and just a note here for all of you watching, we are taking an audience Q&A, so get your questions in the Q&A box if you haven't already. You all are writing some really beautiful moments, but also some really difficult things. And so a question I have for you in your practice as poets, how do you take care of yourself as you're writing through some of these poems? And this is verbally, so feel free to jump in.
I can start. I think something that has really helped me has been therapy. And I did some difficult things that brought up some hard emotions for me, like just starting the process of looking for my birth records and then hitting brick walls with trying to find my birth mother and learn more about her, and then going to the physical location of my birth. And so I had an amazing therapist who helped me with all of those difficult parts. And that really helped me to take care of myself during that.
Oh, I was going to say, I was thinking the exact same thing, like loads of therapy. I also found that, there were times when I just couldn't keep writing and I would do something else. So I like sewing. And so I found that a really comforting way to sort of still kind of mull around the issues, but not have to confront them in exactly the same way.
Oh, you want to go ahead? So yeah, the sewing makes me think of things, I have to get away from the page and from books, I love hiking, I love music and stand-up comedy. I go see stand-up comedy pretty regularly. I love live music. In fact, I fulfilled a lifelong dream to get an electric guitar recently, and to me I sound so good, and then I listen to the original, I think, oh my god, this is terrible. But on an adoptee level, or more specifically, I think for me it was curtailing gaslighting, or it was limiting people who would dismiss my experience or my anger or my confusion, and it was hard to identify at first, being younger and just wanting to be with friends. But I would notice that one person would sort of antagonized me. And I got to a point where I realized that my well-being or self-care, whatever you want to call it, far outweighed the desire to be kind to this person almost even. In other words, I had to set some boundaries. And then lastly, I do think the writing can be a form of it too. Writing and reading can be self-care alongside all of those other things.
I resonate so deeply with the things that have been mentioned so far. And I have like an indoor garden. I have so many plants. I mean, look at these, they're going great. So like, I don't even know what kind of plant this is, but I love it and it's not dead, you know? So that's great. I do that. And I also feel like one thing that, one lesson I got last semester, now that I'm entering my MFA and like actually deeply approaching poetry as at a craft level, as opposed to, I feel like I was a hobbyist before, and now it's like, go get your stuff together. You're sitting down at your desk, you're really doing this. And one thing that I've noticed I'd have to do is if I go really hard in one direction, I have to go really hard in another. And so I watch a lot of Real Housewives. I'm not afraid to say it out loud and own it for all of its monstrosity. I feel like travel is important to me. It's something that is more available to me now in my 30s than was in my 20s. And so I can actually escape in a way that's different and probably a lot healthier than some of the ways that I was escaping in a previous decade. And I find that, you know, things like meditation or being in nature, they're not always accessible to me, but when they are accessible to me, those things feel really good. And so just kind of finding different ways that I can kind of get out of the headspace that I might need to be in to write the best poem, because you might have to be in it for a little bit. But figuring out kind of how to come back from it is such a practice, never a perfect.
I love that. I feel like I'm making lists of how to take care in all of that. Oh, Bo, did you want to add? Oh, I'd love to open it up for questions now. We have some folks who have some questions about bravery. This person says, I'd love to share my voice through poetry, but I'm always scared I'm not good enough. What advice do you have to offer?
I guess I came to this later in life, but you know, the thing is that you're not going to get permission. You have to kind of claim it for yourself. You can decide when you want to share it, if you want to share it, how you want to share it. But I think you just have to claim it, you know, and make the space for yourself, and maybe have some supportive friends around who are also, you know, struggling with similar questions. But, you know, if we can give you permission now, you know, we would do that. But I think you just have to try it out.
Marcie, I'm sorry, would you mind repeating the first part of the question?
Absolutely. So the question is, I would like to share my voice through poetry, but I'm always scared I'm not good enough. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, I think it's easier said than done, but the less we can compare ourselves to others, including in our writing, I think the better off we will be and our writing will be, right? So that I know is easier said than done, but I think if you can cultivate the idea of writing as purely and honestly and authentically, and of course maybe with some craft or whatever else you want to weave into the poems, that is meaningful and significant. And any other things like publications or books will come later, and I would argue more likely because of that authenticity. So if reduce those comparisons, and also I think finding your tribe is really helpful. Somebody who you trust enough and they trust you enough to care enough about you and your writing to say, I don't know if this one's working as well, but also to say that is really wonderful and to support you along the way. And in my experience, it can be a large cohort of people, but for me, it's really just a small handful. I think you only really need 2 or 3 to really keep you going. And I would encourage you too. I would hope you can keep writing or start writing.
I have an idea too. Try reading it out loud and seeing how it feels in your body. And if you can feel it in your body the way a song that really moves you makes you feel in your body, then I would follow that.
I think too with poetry, you know how there's all these videos, I don't know if you're ever on social media, I'm on the internet quite a bit personally, but I feel like there's always these videos of people roller skating. And it's like helpful to watch people that are like, look at me roller skating, and they're mostly falling. And then all of a sudden they're doing cool swoopy moves. I mean, poetry's like that. You know, not every poem is going to be the, you know, crown jewel of the collection that you publish in 10 years, because it does take a while for these, you know, these books to develop, these projects to develop and be drawn out of this. So like, you know, one way can be to just remember, like, it's part of a journey. It's just one little notch. It's just one little poem. It's one little story, and you can always reapproach content later. So, you know, make many documents, printing and burning if you need to, but, you know, save your drafts, but let yourself draft. Like it, you know, having fun and letting go a little bit can actually be really liberating in a lot of ways. You know, we revise ourselves, but we can also revise the page, tell the story differently, change it all, change the ending.
We have another question here. Someone is asking, did you have to negotiate or manage adoptive family reactions to your work? And if so, how might you recommend someone do that?
I don't mind going quickly here. My family doesn't really read my work that I know of. If they do, they're like closet readers, and I'm kind of okay with that. At this point, it's very much like we know you write, that's good for you, kind of relationship with the writing. I will say that I don't take them on as content as much. I actually think, it's not maybe like an intentional thing, or maybe it's a guard in my heart, but I actually take on a little bit more of my, like, these questions about biological family. And that is also fraught because we know our stories have been erased and silenced for various reasons, and there's a lot of shame involved. And we also know, maybe I also know that, like, my birth and adoption story is bound up in someone else's loss of a child. And in some ways, you know, everybody's story is different, but like, just the acknowledgement that, you know, for them, they may not have had as much power in that situation as I might have believed when I was 18, or I might have believed when I was 25 even. But definitely now, you know, in my mid 30s, I'm like, well, they didn't really have a whole lot of power at all back then with what I know about history and all of those things. So I'm conscious of it, but it can't limit what I say necessarily. The rest, it comes later, I guess, my concern about censorship or where it goes, where each poem might find itself.
Yeah, I agree with what LM said about worrying too much later. I was the same way. My family and I are still in touch. There have been patches where it was a little bit strained, but we're still in contact and fairly close. But what I noticed is when I started writing, I think they might have seen it as a hobby or something fun. And then when it gets public, or say with the book, I think they started to see me differently, and almost, you know, I wondered if they felt like, oh, I didn't know he thought that way or experienced those things. So for them, it was new. For me, it was since childhood. And so I was becoming more myself, and whether they want to accept that or not, which hopefully they will, But at the end of the day, I think, again, I think as others have said, it's really for us. And so, but they've been pretty supportive. They're not really poetry people, but they've been supportive.
I guess I'll just say quickly, when I wrote directly about my adoption in the memoir, both my adoptive parents had passed years prior. And I do think that part of, I don't think I would have been able to write the book I did, that had they been living, had my mother in particular been living.
I did have a response from an adoptive family member, and it opened up a discussion where I tried to honor how she was feeling, but we talked about how ultimately I need to tell this story. And when I'm writing and publishing, I do try to be compassionate, but part of my story is that I survived psychological and sexual abuse, and that's within my manuscript and collection. So it's just part of my personal truth. And I'm also not currently in touch with my adoptive family, so that's part of my experience as well.
I think this next question, we have time for one more. I think it's a wonderful question to end on. It's from Jennifer Kwan Dobbs. Hello, Jennifer. Thank you for your books as well. And she says, can the panel talk about how they built their literary imaginations as poets and adopted people? For me, during the 90s, The Open Boat, edited by Garrett Hongo, helped me to articulate and at the same time silenced me as a poet whose experiences had been and are at the margins of Asian American literature.
Yeah, I'll just say real quickly, and hi, Jennifer. I loved The Open Boat. I carried that anthology around with me everywhere I went when it came out. I loved the poems of Lee Young Lee. I loved the early poems of Alice Walker. A lot of people don't know she was a poet first before the great essays and novels. Juan Felipe Herrera was a touchstone. And then, but yeah, and honestly, Jennifer's book, along with Sun Young Shin's book, came out the same year my first book came out, and that felt like a blessing. So yeah, those were some of the early influences.
I guess it's a bit of a hard question for me because I didn't write about my adoption for so long. And partially, I think now looking back, I didn't want to associate, I didn't want to identify that way because I had so much unresolved shame about it. I had internalized all the silence and shame that, you know, wasn't able to be discussed in my family, my adoptive family, that it was just really difficult for me to even consider that a worthwhile topic to engage with. That being said, I encountered the work of Teresa Cha in graduate school, and her book Dictée was just so it was so unlike anything I had ever seen. Her work was the first Korean American author I'd been introduced to. She brought in image and history and French language and attention to language. And there was something that felt really liberating and inspiring about those disparate pieces and trying to bring all those things together, because it very much felt like it mirrored an experience. And that was a way in to think about Koreanness, to think about identity in different ways.
I think about this book, Skirt Full of Black, Sun Young Shin, just on my bookshelf, just at an arm's reach away. But Shin, I feel like turned a light on in me that was like, wait a minute, you can be critical about adoption. And I was like, what? Baby Brimmer was out here in these streets just unaware that that was a possibility. I think about Shannon Gibney's Color and the ways that that really talks about a transracial adoptee growing up in the Midwest. Jennifer, your book, the poem about IHOP is like, because you wrote about postcards, because you were able to find these snapshots and vignettes, it made me feel like, oh, these scenes from life experience are scenes that I can also maybe draw from or find something similar to that. If it's not the same vessel, it's similar. So even across difference, I think.
I really relate to what Mary-Kim was saying. I also internalized a lot of silence. So it wasn't until I was in college and studying with Allison Hawthorne Deming and I discovered Lee Young Lee, and she really encouraged me. And I wrote a poem called Birth Mother in that class. And she said, "You hardly ever speak of her. It's so good to see her in your work." And she was just encouraging me with my writing and to read Asian poets.
I feel like that's a great starter kit for folks to leap off from, as well as all of your work. We are at time, and I want to keep going with this conversation, but thank you all so much for your work, for the years of writing and editing and your community engagement. It really has been a way to build spaces for all of us here. Thank you, LM, Mary-Kim, Lee, Bo. Thank you all who are watching and attending. Just a heads up that you are not going to want to miss our next panel, which is at 4:15 Eastern Time with fiction writers Lisa Bird Wilson, Matthew Salesses, Lauren J. Sharkey, moderated by our own co-director Alice Stevens. I'm going to drop all this in the chat too for folks. Please, you are going to want to buy all of these authors' books if you haven't already. Support local, support adoptee-owned bookstores and adoptee writers. We have loyalty books. There's a special link they created where you can purchase all your books at once. Just click on all of them and add to cart. Buy multiple copies. And we also do want to mention, folks have been asking via email and DMs. This event was a labor of love, so we did not set up any formal donations until this morning because folks have been asking how they can support. So we do not expect this at all, but if you are so moved, the only thing that we have available right now is Venmo, but it does help offset costs of the website and shipping out books to folks. And last but not least, our keynote tonight is Nicole Chung in conversation with Matthew Salesses at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. There's a full afternoon/evening still. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our lovely panelists. Keep writing, and thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon. We'll see you soon.